Just to go ahead and talk a little bit about MTSS. I know everybody has been talking about it a lot, but we really need to think about MTSS a little bit differently than we traditionally have. A lot of times we think of it as just that triangle, and we're working on providing tiered supports for our students who are in the most need. But we also have to think a little bit about making sure that MTSS is about the whole child, and we're thinking about it a little bit in terms of a diamond instead of a triangle. And I'm sure you've seen this before, but I really think that because of the way things have been over COVID and because of the way things have been just historically, we tend to focus on the left side of the diamond, because those are the kids that we feel like need the most intensive and the most terms of supports. But what we are neglecting a little bit are those kids on the other end. There are kids that already know sometimes 90% of the material that we're talking about, and are we providing opportunities for them to be able to go deeper and to learn more as well. So some of the things that, again, we were talking a little bit about a minute ago was really thinking about, we have prevention and we have enrichment and we have intervention for all students. Some students, what we need to really think about too is there are some kids that might be struggling in ELA but are excelling in math, and how are we providing services or support for those students that are maybe have splintered skills or things like that. Sometimes kids need support or enrichment or acceleration in a certain section of math. Maybe they're really great in operations, and so maybe they need a little bit of an enrichment in operations, but their problem solving skills need a little bit of support because of whatever's going on. So really thinking about it a little bit differently in terms of the way that we are approaching MTSS. So why is enrichment important? I think we all know that it's important, but why is it important? The idea behind enrichment is really to provide extended learning opportunities and challenges for those kids that have already mastered or can quickly master the basic curriculum. Some of our kids can master things after hearing it once or twice, and they're good to go. Some of our kids can handle it after 2 or 3 times, as opposed to the 10 or more typical times that our students who are typically developing need. Enrichment gives students the opportunity and the more time to study some things with greater depth or breadth or complexity. There's some really cool strategies out there that I'm going to share with you today. And there's way more out there than I could put in an hour and a half. But the idea is that we are continuing to look at both ends of that diamond. So really, enrichment provides opportunities for students to pursue their own learning areas and interests of strengths. And the idea is, again, to keep our advanced students engaged and supports in their accelerated academic needs. A lot of times, if you look at your PIMS data, or if you're looking at things where you're measuring student growth, a lot of our advanced kids aren't growing at the same rate as our on target or below target students. And part of that is because they're coming to class knowing some things and they're not getting any enrichment or acceleration to help provide them with the supports that they need. Again, we're talking about with enrichment here, we're talking about rigor and relevance when we're talking about acceleration and enrichment as well. So what do we already know that our kids know, and how can we help our kids moving forward? So here's just a really brief, what is enrichment? So enrichment is really talking about, maybe you're having flexible groups, maybe changing daily. I wouldn't suggest it. That's really overwhelming for you and for the kids, but it could be changing by the unit. Your groups could be changing by the topic that you're discussing in ELA, math, or science. You can be providing choices for students. It can be directly connected to content, or it can be more of like a project-based learning opportunity. It's really giving kids the opportunity to go deeper in the same content. So when we're looking at enrichment, we're not talking about, if I'm talking about main idea, for example, in ELA, I still want to keep talking about main idea, but I maybe want to give them a different level of text so that they can be enriched, and so that they're still talking about what we're talking about as a collective, but they're going to be enriched in using a different text or something like that. Sometimes enrichment can be independent activities. It's really differentiating for those students. So a lot of what I hear when I'm talking to districts across the state is that students are given extra packets, or in their program, they have these enrichment activities that they can do. And they're doing that in addition to what they're already doing in their current classrooms. And sometimes that for our advanced kids can feel a little bit like a punishment, like I'm doing my work and I'm getting my work done, and now you're going to give me even more work. So really the idea here is that we're differentiating. And a lot of our programs, most of my background is elementary, so I apologize if you're middle school or high school, because that's where my background is. But a lot of our programs have different activities for different levels of kids. So it would really be an idea of swapping out what's being done for typically developing kids and giving them that enrichment. It's not giving them more on top of everything else. The idea here is that it's planned and purposeful. It sounds really overwhelming because I've got a plan for my kids that are on traditional track, and I've also got a plan for my kids that need more supports. And now I've got to think about this other group of kids, and I don't need to be planning 20 different lesson plans. That's not at all even close to what we're saying here. What we're thinking is if you can break your groups into like 3 or 4 groups, and then you can plan for those kids. If you really start thinking about your traditional kids, the kids in the middle, that middle half of your students, and then figure out what you can do that would be similar to, but either enriched or differentiated for those students. Enrichment is not a label. All of us that come from special ed backgrounds understand this a lot. Enrichment is not a label. They're not the enrichment student. They're not the gifted student. Those kinds of things. It's not just for gifted kids as well. There are a lot of kids that need enrichment that are not labeled as gifted or identified as gifted, and they still need to have some of their needs met. Already said it's not busy work. It's not random assignments or games or puzzles. Like Sudoku's fun, but it's not enrichment. So I've seen a lot of times that they'll give out fun little things for other kids to do, and it's not meeting their needs. I'm going to pause for a second. I've gone through 12 slides and talked at you. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts about what I'm kind of talking at you about? So when we're talking about this, and when we're talking about looking at enrichment as part of that diamond instead of a triangle, learning acceleration versus remediation is a really important thing to have conversations about, because it's really an approach. When you're talking about learning acceleration, it's an approach that really gives students that laser focused instruction on those specific skills that they need to learn. So when you're looking at diving into your standards and your competencies, it's really thinking about making sure that you're targeting that skilled instruction, and that's a little bit less than just looking at math as a whole. So when you think about like this, and the reason why I put a race car here on the slide is because race car drivers really only pull over when they need fuel or their tires placed. And so what the idea here is that a lot of our enriched kids, or who need enrichment, are going to be okay on their own for the most part, and they will only need support when they feel like they need it. So a lot of times when we're thinking about, say, guided math or guided reading, they need intervention and they need conversations with the teachers, but they don't need as many touch points as our students who are in the traditional path or needing remediation. So if I was looking at like a guided math situation, I'd be meeting with my kids who need remediation daily if I could possibly. And these kids that are needing enrichment, I'd say maybe once a week they would need touch points to just say, hey, where are you at? How are you feeling? And getting them working independently. A lot of times they can do most of the work on their own with maybe some conversations with teachers. Again, the idea behind acceleration and enrichment is acceleration is moving through the curriculum more quickly. The enrichment piece that we're talking about today is also thinking about this same idea, just going deeper with it. When we're thinking about enrichment or acceleration and remediation too, remediation is focusing on what the kids missed last year or the kids are missing this year, as opposed to acceleration and enrichment focus on what's going on in the present and the future. What will they need to know to excel? So we're kind of having to differentiate a little bit there. And just to go a little bit deeper into this, when we're thinking about these kinds of things, we really need to think about, there's 6 areas that we're looking at here. Self-efficacy, when you start switching from providing remediation only, even for those kids, like I said before, that have maybe splintered skills or need some support, we can think about providing them accelerated or enriched opportunities for those kids that are needing the support. It gives them the self-confidence. It gives them the idea that I can do the work here. When you're looking at things like basic skills, you're pulling out those basic skills that students will need to be successful, and you're accelerating the idea of remediation. So I know that sounds silly that I'm using two words at the same time that sound counterproductive, but you're really targeting those skills. And when you look at things like the standards, the SAS portal has them, and I really like what Becky Millspaw created. Feels like eons ago. She has a curriculum framework that really looks at grade bands. If you look at the grade bands, you can see how skills are progressing from K to 2 or 3 to 5 or middle school or high school. And you can pull out those basic skills that are needed, that you can provide accelerated instruction for those students that need remediation so that they can be more successful in their current class placement. When you're thinking also about things like prior knowledge, background knowledge accounts for about 60% of our kids' understanding. So if you're reading something or having conversations with your kids, background knowledge is going to play a huge role in that. And if we're talking about accelerating their background knowledge, it's giving them key prior knowledge to these lessons so that they can be successful in their classroom, in their instruction as well. Also, when we're talking a little bit about this too, we're talking about the relevance and how are things relevant to the current lesson at hand. We're making connections to those core classes, and we're pacing, and we're providing active and hands-on experiences for our students that are not necessarily grounded only in remediation. So the reason why you're here, I'm sure, are what are some strategies or things that I can actually do in my classroom? I know all these things, Patrice, move on. Okay. So research shows that students really already know, some of our kids already know 40 to 50% of the material. And in some extreme cases of our advanced and gifted kids, they know 85% of the content that's being taught in the class. I cannot imagine, because I was not one of those kids, I cannot imagine coming into a class knowing 85% of what is going to be taught and then have to sit there and listen to things that I already know. So the thing that we have to keep in mind is we have to keep thinking about all of our kids, because they might know more than what most of our kids know. A lot of our kids that are ready for enrichment or acceleration can, like I said, learn in a more rapid pace. So it only takes them 1 to 3 repetitions as opposed to 10 or more. So what are we doing with that extra time? There's a lot of extra time in our classroom. We're providing enriched activities. The one thing that I cannot stress is that more work does not mean it's more challenging. So giving them more of the same does not mean that it's enrichment. Some of our advanced learners, and this is something that's coming up a lot after COVID, some of our advanced learners might be advanced in math, but not in reading, or do really great in science in the lab, but aren't really great at the memorizing or the scientific formulas and things like that. A lot of that is coming because of the splintered skills that some of our kids are having based off of that year and a half we were experiencing instruction at home or things like that. So there's some interesting splintered skills that are happening with our kids. Sometimes, and this is a lot of times based off of the idea of background knowledge being 60% of what we know. They could be advanced in elementary school, hit 4th grade, and they're on grade level with the rest of their peers. That happens a lot, especially in ELA. So they might not be advanced for the rest of their school careers. They could be consistently advanced in all these areas, or they might have a significant deficit in another area, and we're calling that twice exceptional. A lot of this happens with students who have an emotional disturbance that are labeled as gifted or advanced, or students who have dyslexia but are doing really great in math. And so there's a lot of really interesting and creative ways we can work with our kids. One of the things that we're trying to prevent is the underachiever. And a lot of times this happens with our gifted and advanced students. They become underachievers because they perceive what they're learning is not meaningful. I'm sure that happens a lot in middle school and high school. It's not, they don't see it as important. They don't like being different. They don't want to be seen as having something else to do or given an additional work. And so they just sit back and kind of coast through schools. They have a fear of getting more work. So if they've experienced a classroom where they continue to get another packet of worksheets to do, if they are done early, a lot of our kids, especially now, are struggling with perfectionism and their lack of self-confidence. And a lot of our kids really struggle and become underachievers because they're struggling with their executive functioning. So a lot of our kids post-COVID, it's been tremendously hard. I've seen all over the place that our students don't know how to take notes or how to save what they need to save or do any of that kind of executive functioning type thing. And so they're struggling a lot with a lot of that. So what are the foundations for enrichment and differentiation? We're going to talk a little bit about this, then I'm going to give you some really cool strategies. So one, the foundations for enrichment are really thinking about using appropriate assessment data, whatever you have access to. If you have pre-tests built into your curriculum, use those. Use your end of unit assessments, give them opportunities to figure out what they actually have skill gaps in. You're going to select texts and materials that provide an appropriate level of challenge. You're going to differentiate for small groups if you possibly can. Breaking them into smaller groups gives them opportunities to have really good conversations at their level. Adjusting the pacing if your students need some acceleration. So if they're good to go, they don't need to sit and listen to lectures for as long as everyone else does. Give them opportunities for cross-curricular applications. There's some really great research around project-based learning and problem-based learning that is allowing students to basically design their own projects, things like Genius Hour, that allow students to hone their skills for research and presentations and things like that, while looking at topics that are of interest to them and therefore leads to deeper conversations and things like that. You're also going to give kids opportunities, which I think is some of the cool things. There's this program called CSO, Chief Science Officers, that happens at the middle school and high school level. And what is really cool about that program, and I think you can replicate this in your classroom if you really wanted to, is kids are choosing passion projects. They're implementing their passion projects, and then they're presenting their findings and their solutions to a larger group. So there's really cool ways that you can implement those kinds of questions and discussions. Giving them things like debates and things like that are really great opportunities for enrichment without really the teacher having to do the bulk of the work. The idea is that the kids should go home more tired than you most days. And I know as a teacher, I went home way more exhausted than my kids all the time. So we need to flip that and make sure our kids are working harder than we are. So we're going to take a few minutes, and there's this really cool article from Edutopia. It is not long at all.
I like the idea in the article because obviously we all know time becomes an issue sometimes, putting things into practice and how to easily manage it. But I really like the idea of the students traveling to like enrichment, remediation. It doesn't always necessarily have to rely on one teacher to have these different groups, maybe even like team it across the grade levels. If you have multiple teachers teaching it, one teacher does this, and then maybe even switch the following like marking period or something. Because I'm elementary based, so I'm just thinking even getting the students to move, meet new people, things like that, is a good skill to learn as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
There was just one line that just stood out to me. It said something like, a student can learn how to decode reading a book about computer science just as well as, as any other book. And I just, or building a computer, whatever the reference was. But it just kind of struck me like, it's right. We could still have high interest, enriching experiences really at their level. So it was just kind of not a light bulb moment, but it really did just kind of drive home the point.
I think in an ideal world, like the more that I learn about how our brain learns and the connections about, there's a really great book if you're interested in that kind of stuff. It's a little old now, but it's still good. It's called How the Brain Learns by David Sousa. And there's all these different, like how the brain learns math. He's got a book for that, and ELA, and he's got how the brain, like Carrie Kessler and I put together a thing around how the brain learns, how the autistic student's brain learns. There's all these really cool correlations and connections. And the more that I learn about how our brain learns, the more I think we need to integrate our content as much as possible for a few reasons. One of the things One of the things that I, again, was learning about was exactly what you said, Charisse, is we can learn how to read in a science or social studies text. It's just looking at the content differently, and then you're enhancing their background knowledge. And there's a lot of research, like I said earlier, about how background knowledge accounts for 60 or to 70% of kids being able to pass assessments. So if kids have a really good understanding of, say, baseball, and the story prompt is about baseball, and they aren't reading on grade level, they will almost certainly score better on a comprehension assessment than someone who has no background knowledge about baseball, who is an accelerated reader. So we really need to think about how can we integrate our content as much as possible. I think that's a fabulous point, Charisse. Thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else find anything interesting in the article? If you're not familiar with Edutopia, it's a really great resource, and they have a ton of articles. They're very research-based, and everything they're putting out lately has been really, really good and really accessible. So I love Edutopia as a resource for me as a learner. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what are some potential activities. One of the things that I absolutely love, and this focuses a little bit on math, more than it does other things, but it's this idea of doing the most difficult first. So when you're thinking about, like, say, a worksheet or a math book problems and all this other stuff, students who can demonstrate mastery of the most 5 difficult problems on that worksheet or whatever should be able to be excused from doing the remaining part of the work. So what this is the teacher will choose the 5 most difficult problems. In a lot of our textbooks, it tends to be the last 5 problems because that's just where they put them. If the student can get those correct with 80 or 90% accuracy, they then are excused from either doing the homework, or they're excused from the remaining amount of practice. And then what that does is that frees up time for them to work on any of those passion projects or other activities. So when we're talking a little bit about time, Darlene, you mentioned time. Students need the time to be able to do this stuff too. So if they're not having to do all of the problems and they've demonstrated mastery, this gives them time without having to take away from specials or any of the other things, for them to be able to work on some of the other projects that they find a little more interesting that are going to be providing them with enrichment opportunities. You can do this in science too, especially the older grades when you're doing things like physics and maybe chemistry and things like that. If they're like converting equations and things like that. Now I'm talking like I know what I'm talking about in high school science. I don't. I just remember being in chemistry class and converting formulas for like a whole trimester. It was horrible. But it could potentially work in other areas as well. Something huge that we don't take as much advantage of is pre-testing. When we're talking about curriculum, you can pre-test every student in your class, regardless of whether or not they're needing advancement or whether they're needing some enrichment or whatever they're needing. You can pre-test your whole class, and given the freedom within your curriculum, you don't have to teach all of this stuff then. So you could have a class that is really strong in certain areas, and that allows you the opportunity, again, to move your time around a little bit in your unit to go deeper into other content, depending on what your kids do and don't know. And then you can break up your groups if you're doing guided groups in any way, when you have a better understanding of where students are at. I recommend pre-testing every unit if you have the opportunity, or you can do quarters or trimesters or things like that. The other thing that I absolutely love, and even your kid, all of your kids are going to, and they're going to get something out of it. They might not love it, but they'll get something out of it, is the idea of debating. You can have a debate about anything, whether or not the grass is green. You can debate whether or not the grass is green. The idea behind this is it's engaging. It's a lot of fun. It's giving kids opportunities to do research. If you're going to go into a deeper debate, it's giving kids the opportunity to practice public speaking, and it gives them opportunities to plan and choose their words wisely. And what I love about debate is that they don't necessarily have to agree with the topic, and they can be on the other side of the side that they don't agree with, and they still have to debate it. And that gives them those critical thinking skills that a lot of our kids are really going to need, especially now that AI is becoming even more intelligent, and that these things are now creeping into all of our work everywhere, kids are going to have to be able to discern and debate whether or not these things that are coming out are factual or true, or even close to relevant to what they're talking about. So giving kids the opportunity for debate is really huge. One of the things that I found when I was teaching my third graders in Philadelphia was we did this thing called everyone had 2 cents when we had these kinds of debates. And the reason for that was I had some kids that were conversation usurpers. They would not stop talking. So when we give them 2 cents, they have to think about what they're going to say because they can only give their 2 cents in these conversations. The other thing I like about it is our kids who are hesitant to speak know they have to speak twice and that's it. So they can start sharing their 2 cents and everybody has a conversation that is, no one is usurping the conversation because we all know we have those kids in our class. Giving kids opportunities to build critical thinking is another way of providing enrichment. So this is ways of, you can have open-ended problems. There's some really great sites out there like openmiddle.com is really great for math. There's all these Socratic seminars that are really great for kids to be building their critical thinking. So these kinds of things can be through games or activities, and it can also be kind of laying the foundation for debate if you choose to go down that route. Another thing that I'm seeing taking off a lot across the country is this idea of giving kids opportunities to create their own businesses. I know that I believe it's Upper Marion has their middle school kids that that grow plants using, I think, their aquaponics program, and then they turn around and turn it into a business opportunity. What is really cool about this is it's giving kids the opportunity to be entrepreneurs, to from start to finish make a product, to sell their product, to market their product. It's giving them all of these skills that we're trying to get them to do in ELA and math and science and social studies, and putting it into a practical place for them to be able to put their skills into practice in a safe space. A lot of our kids don't feel super safe thinking about those kinds of things. Another thing that I love is Genius Hour. Kind of talked about this a little bit. Genius Hour is the idea that students are allowed to pick a passion project and then work on it. And they have a set amount of time every day or week or month to be able to work on these programs. They're a lot less formal. Kids can use their own topics of interest, but I will say for kids who aren't used to this, they're still going to need scaffolds. The idea is that it's supposed to be very free and open and letting them do whatever, but I've noticed that a lot of kids they're not used to that openness, so they still need those scaffolds. The place that I love to go for these kinds of ideas, there's 2 places. It's the Buck Institute, has a ton of really great resources with a lot of rubrics that are already created and a lot of ideas. And another person that I absolutely love is John Spencer. He has a ton of prompts and things that can get kids started on Genius Hour kinds of things. The idea behind it is that's authentic learning. Kids are doing inquiry-based things. They're having a lot of fun and it's student-centered. And there's not a whole lot of pressure put on the teacher to create a research project. The kids can then come up with their own ideas. The other thing that I think is really cool for our upper elementary and middle school and high school kids is the idea of creating a literary society. It's kind of like that idea of having those old saloons back in the early 1900s, 1800s, where you'd go and you'd talk about the cool stuff that's happening. Creating a literary society is a really cool way of getting kids to just have conversation about interesting texts that they're reading. We're getting them to read things that are outside of the norm of their responsibilities, and they're having conversations, and it's a really cool way. You can set it up through Socratic seminars if you're familiar with those. You can do debates. You can have all kinds of really cool things that's getting kids to think a little bit outside of the box. And then one of the other things that we're doing a lot here at the IU is we do a lot of things during Hour of Code. There's a CS week, I think it's October or November, and Andrew Kuhn, who works at our IU, leads up a lot of that stuff. He's more than willing to come in and have conversations with you or do demonstration lessons in your classroom with your teachers or with you guys in your class on how to incorporate coding into other things. There's really cool devices like Mickey Mickeys and Ozobots and things like that that can be integrated into content that makes it a little more fun and gives kids a different opportunity to experience other STEM type careers using things like Scratch and code and things like that. One final thing that I'm going to talk about here in terms of like larger activities is MCIU. We have a lot of student events that are really cool ways of providing enrichment. We have an event called Dream It, Design It, where kids come and they, and I believe it's completely free for you guys. They come to the IU. They don't know what project they're going to be given. They have to create a solution to a problem before they leave, and they have to present it. So they go through the project-based process. We have a math opportunity called CalcuSolve that takes them deeper into math problem solving. That's upper elementary through high school. We have 24, which is a math competition. We have Reading Olympics. So we have all of these other really cool things that are at no cost or low cost to districts to be able to provide really cool enrichment opportunities for kids. So I'm going to stop there. I think I talked to you again for another 20 minutes of some stuff. Are there any questions or anything you'd like me to go a little bit deeper into for any of the things that I just talked about here?
Actually, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Just because I am talking elementary and I saw the debating kind of where your statement on the slide was for higher grades. And I'm wondering if that's because elementary, like almost like, can you teach them, even though they might be in second and third grade, those debating skills? Now, whether it's going to be a true debate or not.
Right.
It might be just me versus the students or something like that.
Or they could even have sides. I've done it before where we picked a book. Like I've even, and when I taught third grade, we debated whether we read Red Riding Hood, and then we read the story that was written by the wolf. And they picked a side, and they had to debate whether or not Red Riding Hood was actually not a spoiled brat according to the big bad wolf, or like looking at it from the two different angles. And we had conversations about that, and we did do the 2 cents thing. Everyone had 2 cents, and they figured it out. They had a day to figure it out. They wrote paper on it, and then we had a long conversation about it. The idea I think that I put on the side, and it said for older grades, is really if like you can make a club out of it, like you can make it big if you really want to make it big, but you can 100% teach debating skills. Or it's really conversations, how to have a conversation without being a butthead, really is what it comes down to, right? Like it's teaching them how to have civil conversations in your classroom. I think you can 100% do it with young kindergartners can do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking more on the club aspect, only because from an admin point of view, and I teach at a virtual school, so I'm looking at engagement, and I already run a few clubs to engage the students, but I would love to do something like this.
Yeah. Reach out. I mean, feel free to reach out if you want. I can help you with whatever you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else?
I don't know if this is the time or if it'll come up, but have you started to explore ChatGPT and kind of its implications?
So it wasn't going to come up, but it can. So we have explored ChatGPT a little bit. The implications of ChatGPT, I think, can be huge on both ends of the spectrum, right? The idea that kids can give a prompt to a computer and have an entire essay or whatever written about it can be a little daunting. The thing that I think that we as educators, we can't fight it. It's coming, it's happening, and ChatGPT is the tip of the iceberg. There is some stuff out there that you're like, oh, it scares me a little, to be honest. I mean, because I'm older and I don't know any better, but it scares me a little bit. The thing that we as educators have to realize, it's coming, it's happening, and it will show up. We have to think about shifting our instruction to being more of a critical eye in terms of like, what is it producing? Is it making sense? And things like ChatGPT will learn from you as a person. And so it will start to give you a little more biased results based on what the questions are asked in the system. So that's where we have to use our analytical skills, and we have to start analyzing. I think some cool things that can happen is we as educators can create things with ChatGPT and use those as teaching tools. I think the more we fight it, the harder it's going to be in our classrooms, and our kids are going to put up barriers and not necessarily be as receptive to what we can say about it if we are so anti artificial intelligence, because they love it. They love it. They think it's great. And it's part of just them growing up. So I think we've got to think differently about how we use the tool to provide some of those critical thinking skills that our kids are not going to get otherwise. It's a little overwhelming to think about. I don't know if I answered your question, Charisse.
No, you did. It's the conversation, and even, prior to GPT, I've been having conversations with teachers about how we're assessing students as they have more resources literally at their fingertips.
Yeah.
A quick Google can take the place of a test, right?
Yep.
And so how are we assessing students in a meaningful way? I'll use a quick example of, I had a student who the language teacher said was cheating, and it's because the student used Google Translate to help with some of his language homework. And to the student, it was like, I just thought it was another resource like a dictionary. I wasn't trying to cheat. It was, so there's some generational stuff there. The students are looking at things very differently than even we are, because they're growing up with it in a different way. And so to your point, they love the artificial intelligence because they're growing up and interacting with it in a very different way. Yep. They didn't grow up on Terminator.
No. I think that's why it scares me a little bit. I was over at Flux the other day. I don't know if you've been there, but they have this robot dog and I don't like it. I'm like, don't bring that thing out. Don't bring that thing out. And it's like, well, don't do it. I don't like it. I need to not watch Terminator ever again.
I'm just curious about, how we as educators can leverage what it can do.
Yeah.
And really teach students kind of how to use it appropriately, so that's kind of the space that I'm in.
Use it appropriately and really analyze it. I mean, there's some crazy stuff coming out there where I'm sure you've seen it, where there's these realistic videos of people that look real, that are saying things that you have to have a critical eye to be able to discern, no, so-and-so would not say those things in that manner. So we have to shift our thinking. We really have to go into the 4 C's, which are communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. How can we really focus on those 4 things to help our kids understand that just because you see it with your eyes doesn't make it real and doesn't make it factual? We have to have those kinds of conversations instead of making sure that kids aren't cheating, because they're right. I couldn't walk into Germany without Google Translate and be successful in Germany because I don't know German, right? So that's where I think we have to shift the way in which we're teaching to meet our kids where they're at. And it's scary and overwhelming, and it's going to be a big shift, and it's going to happen really quickly. Really quickly. Any other thoughts? That was a good one. So I created a little, a bunch of resources, because like I said, the other half of my job here is in this Explore link. There is a whole nother section here on who is the advanced learner. We talked a little bit about this. So you're going to scroll through to the second part of this on how do I differentiate to my advanced learners. Take some time to dig through this. Differentiation is and it is not. There's some really great resources here. When we're talking about differentiation, we're talking about readiness, interest, learner profiles, content, process, product. And then you don't have to read this article, but there are some really cool other options here for you to dive into for some more resources to think about how can you provide enrichment across the different tiers. And then what we'll do is we'll come back together here. Is there anything that anyone would like to share? Any connections they made? Yeah, there is a lot. That's why I wanted to give you a bunch of time. So I appreciate you taking the time to go in there and explore all that. So these links are going to be active for basically ever. So if you ever want to come back to them or go into anything in more depth, I have a lot more. I just tried to condense it into something that would make sense in an hour and a half. I have a lot more. I didn't want to overwhelm you guys. But if there was anything you wanted to share, any connections that you made. Additionally, you're welcome anytime. There are additional things in here, resource-wise, again, connected to that original document I shared with you guys. There are some cool enrichment SDI activities if you're looking for things to put into your students who are twice exceptional or GIEPs. Two things there. William and Mary is a really connected college for gifted specifically, but there's a lot of really good resources in there from William and Mary. And then there is another course that I created, even more resources if you really wanted to get into it. There's a ton of tech specific resources, ELA resources if you want to be using any of those things, math specific, science specific, and social studies. There's also some formative assessment resources. There's so much here. Again, I don't want to overwhelm you, but there's a ton of stuff here. For science tech, they're all just Padlets that during COVID, I started compiling things and I just keep adding things to it. So that is all there on this so much technology, so little time thing there. That's also in our document for you guys if you want to just explore anything else. Are there any questions, comments, or anything else before I let you all go?
I just wanted to say you all inspired me talking about the background knowledge and just how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking to plan some of our PBIS opportunities that we have our students use points to participate in things. Mm-hmm. And have them tie into some of the stories that are in their reading anthologies that can give them some knowledge about it before they get to those stories. So I'm going to start exploring that this summer. So thank you.
Good. You're welcome. The playlist is awesome, Tamara. I love the idea of it. I mean, it could be like we've seen the tic-tac-toe boards. It can be whatever, but I love the idea of giving kids a choice. One of the things that I learned as a teacher was I would make the corners things that I absolutely wanted them to do, it was the corners, so that they had to do at least two. If I was doing a tic-tac-toe board, at least two of them were difficult things, and then the ones in the middle were the ones that were a little bit easier for them. And I made that center spot a difficult one too. All right. Last but not least, I want to remind you that you should never, ever, ever feel guilty about resting over the summer. It is exhausting. Your jobs, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, have been all-encompassing, exhausting, and you need to take the time to fix, heal, relax, enjoy yourself, find out who you are, read a really good book. I've got some really cool recommendations. I really shouldn't be on TikTok, but I am. It is some funny-ish, but there's some really good book talk recommendations on TikTok if you're looking for books. I really shouldn't be on TikTok. It's embarrassing that at 40 I'm saying I'm on TikTok. It's funny. Anyway, take time to enjoy yourself, enjoy your families, enjoy your summer. You have 100% earned it. And so have a fabulous summer. Hopefully you'll join us for some collaborative conversations this afternoon, I think at 3:00. You'll log back in and Lauren is going to work us through some of that, but enjoy your summer. Take care of yourselves.